Ghost Story, A Wonderful World. Author, Trang Bao Dien. Stunned, he regained consciousness and saw the lid of the chest burst open. He went closer to look inside, then Khang arrived late in the afternoon. The sudden summer rain made the road slippery. After walking for a while, he had to take off his western shoes and dig his toes into the mud. At first he winced a bit because the soles of his feet touched the sharp pebbles, but the surrounding scenery made him so engrossed that he forgot everything about life. The rain accentuates the cool, peaceful look of this suburban land. On both sides of the road are lush green trees, sometimes there are fruit trees laden with fruit, and wildflower vines climbing up the roadside bloom brilliantly. He didn't know what flower it was, a light purple flower with delicate petals, green vines like veins on a human wrist, tightly wrapping around everything it encountered. There were also birds chirping on the tree branches. He happily whistled in response, feeling like all the hardships on the journey here seemed to disappear. The house appeared before Khang's eyes exactly as the landlady described. The wooden house was built in the old style, tiled, and the tiled roof has turned green moss over time. The walls are the same, each piece of wood is mottled with moss and mold, long green ivy vines creeping everywhere as if adding to the ancient look of the house. Khang raised his hand to wipe away the drops of sweat on his forehead, looked around. The afternoon sunlight was about to fade. Insert the key into the lock. The lock is rusty and damp because there has been no human breath for a long time. The heavy wooden door opened with a screeching sound. The musty smell entered Khang's nose. In the dim light, Khang tried to find the power switch. After a while of groping, the light was turned on. The yellow light from the old light bulb covered with cobwebs made the room become warmer. After more than half an hour of struggling, he found a place to put his luggage and arranged a place to sleep for the night. After all that, he was exhausted. Luckily, he still had the cakes he bought on the street. Came here to eat temporarily to relieve hunger. Khang brought a chair to sit in front of the house, ready to breathe the fresh air while eating leisurely. At this time, the darkness had sneaked up to the tree roots, and soon night would cover everything. The gloomy rainy afternoon scene here, with the chirping of insects mixed with the croaking sounds of frogs, made him even more sad, so he stood up and took a deep breath. Suddenly a cold wind blew from behind, making him shiver. The door screeched loudly. It's been dark outside since then. The house has 3 very spacious rooms. In addition to the main room in the front, there are 2 smaller side rooms adjacent to each other. Khang finds the middle room has all the necessary items such as beds, cabinets, and is airy for sleeping, which is very satisfactory. The last room was carefully locked, but the old wooden door was no longer sturdy. He glanced in and saw that it was dark inside, and vaguely in the middle of the room was a rather large table. I find it strange why the landlady didn't give me the key to this room. Never mind. I said, anyway, I'm very tired today. Let's find a way to open the door tomorrow. He quickly packed his luggage and went to bed. The fatigue of a long trip would have made him sleep right away, but he kept tossing and turning restlessly. For some reason he had a premonition that there was something very strange about this house. Although the house was old, it was still quite beautiful and sturdy. The garden was spacious, but the landlady sold it for a price too cheap. Are you lucky? Lying there thinking about it, it was past midnight. He was about to take a nap when suddenly, in the night there was a rustling sound. What's that sound? He listened attentively. The sound suddenly stopped. He thought he heard it wrong, then suddenly the sound appeared again, rustling, rustling, more and more clearly. In the dead of night, at this time suddenly everything was quiet as if there was only that sound. It sounded like the sound of nails scratching on a wooden wall, rustling. Rustling. Khang stood up, fully awake, clearly. The sound clearly came from the other side of the wall, in the locked room. He walked over and pressed his ear against the wall. Suddenly a shrill scream rang out as if it tore Khang's eardrums. He felt his eyes glaze over. Khang was dizzy. He grabbed his head and walked out. His foot suddenly stepped on something slimy. He lowered his head to look. The yellow light flashed. He screamed in panic. Blood flowed from the body of a man. The long-haired girl lay sprawled on the stained floor, her face covered in blood and her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Khang's heart seemed to stop beating in fear. He screamed in panic. Khang woke up, panting, sweat pouring out like a bath soaking his entire shirt. He looked around frantically. It turned out he was just dreaming. It had already been morning. But the dream was so real, his heart was still pounding, the fear was still there. This was the first time he had such a scary nightmare. Maybe it's because I'm so tired that I have this dream. That day Khang spent the whole morning trying to contact the landlady, but to no avail. She turned off the phone, and her children, grandchildren and relatives did not know where she went after receiving Khang's rent. He tiredly turned off the phone, remembering her unusually happy expression when Khang agreed to buy the house. He decided to visit around the neighborhood, both to get to know the neighbors and to ask about the house he was living in. Now he realized that the house was quite separate from other houses in the neighborhood, because the garden was also larger. People in this area are also quite friendly. They are all poor workers who have been here for a long time, so when they knew he came from another place, they were all very happy. The only thing was that when they heard him say he was in that house, they became strange, with fear in their eyes. After a while of not being able to ask anything except that the house had been abandoned for a long time, he bought some food and returned home. The first thing he did was open the door to that room. Just a few hits of the hammer and the lock comes loose. There was nothing in the room except old bricks and tiles and a bunch of tables and chairs with broken legs. Inside there was a fairly large, rotten, old chest. Suddenly there was a noise. He suddenly looked up. On the rafters, a big black cat looked up at him with bright eyes. Suddenly he heard someone calling in front of the house. A girl's voice, clear and pleasant. Khang walked out onto the porch. In the clear afternoon sunlight slanting through the roof, through the green ivy vines, the gentle color of the silk shirt hugs the girl's fragile body. Her long, silky black hair falls down her round shoulders, highlighting her smooth white skin. The girl looked up at Khang, her big black eyes. He was stunned, not expecting such beauty to exist in this lonely place. The city he had just left was so crowded, but he had never seen anyone as beautiful as this girl. Seeing him keep staring, the girl shyly bowed her head, her red lips smiling slightly, adding to her charm. Khang was confused. She is. I'm from here. The girl ran her hand through her hair, her fingers were white and blue. I saw someone new moving in, so I came in to say hello. She looked at his hand holding the hammer. Are you busy? No, I'm not busy. I'm done. He found himself suddenly stuttering. Please come in and play. The girl gently walked up the steps, sat in the chair Khang had hastily brought out, then he sat down confused. I just arrived yesterday, so the house is still very messy, so just sit here and we'll talk, don't bother. You're so polite, it's okay. My name is Duyan, your name is Khang, right? Khang was surprised. How do you know my name? Gentle girl. You can just call me Duyan, I hear people calling your name so I know. Ah. Oh. Ms. Duyan seems to know a lot of people here. I know. I'm from here. So do you know the previous owner of this house? I heard no one's been here for a long time. That's right, it's been a long time since anyone dared to be here. No one dares. Why? Because. The girl suddenly bowed her head, showing the same scared look he had seen since morning. Suddenly she spoke softly, her voice as light as a breeze, cold and dry. Because there are ghosts here. Suddenly, the sound of the window slamming behind him made Khang jump. The girl raised her face, an electric current seemed to run down Khang's spine, those eyes. Her voice remained monotonous and emotionless. A while ago, here, right in this house, a girl was killed. No one knows how she died. It happened on a rainy night, people didn't find her body, just there. The girl slowly pointed into the house, there was a lot of blood on the floor. Khang felt sweat begin to flow down his face, the girl's eyes glared at him. Her unjust soul has not yet been transcended, so it is still mixed up here and there. Since then, no one dares to come here, because at night they often see the shadow of a girl, and strange noises. Cat! The cat roared plaintively. Khang stood up in horror. He stared at the girl in front of him. In the afternoon light she looked pale and pale like a corpse approaching him. The girl burst into laughter. Khang was surprised, it turned out she was teasing him. But his heart was still beating rapidly. Duyan smiled and raised her hand to gently wipe the sweat from his forehead. Khang hesitantly took her hand was soft and strangely cold. When seeing her off to the alley, the girl bent down to pick a wild flower. He looked at her, realizing that there was a peaceful attachment in his heart. That night, Khang went to bed early, but just like last night he kept tossing and turning. The unexpected encounter with the girl and that scary story kept haunting his mind. Her gentle beauty couldn't help but make Khang dreamy. Duyan, is it also fate that brought him to meet her? At midnight, the sultry air made Khang wake up. He lit a cigarette and opened the window for fresh air. Suddenly he listened carefully, the hair on his neck stood up because of that noise. This time he heard it very clearly, it was the sound of human nails scratching on rough wood. That sound echoed in the quiet night, but it was very close. Khang, on the other side of the room. Fear could not overcome curiosity. Khang walked over and opened the door. Strangely enough, the closed room was filled with cold wind blowing into his face. Stunned, he regained consciousness and saw the lid of the chest burst open. He came closer to look inside, when a black shadow rushed at him. Khang's face darkened and he fell to the floor. The black cat looked at him with green eyes and ran towards the door. He followed its shadow and suddenly gasped. At the door, in the dim light, the silhouette of a girl with her hair down appeared. A flash of lightning appeared. Appeared the pale girl's face, it was Duyan. She slowly walked towards the door. Khang gasped, gathered all his strength to calm down. He stood up and followed the girl's shadow towards the door. That shadow seemed to fly on the ground. Khang kept looking at the color of her shirt. He followed her. He didn't even know why he followed her, even though his feet kept tangling together, getting tangled in vines and roots, causing him to trip and fall several times. Arriving at the edge of the large pond behind the house, Duyan stopped and stared down at the pond. It was storming, The wind was blowing loudly through her ears, blowing fallen leaves rustling and hitting Khang in the face. He tried to open his eyes and cried, "Duyan." The girl slowly turned around, blinked again, her pale face and eyes filled with sadness, then fell into the pond, disappearing. Khang rushed forward in panic but saw nothing. The rain poured down like a receding stream, everything became dark. The sound of a cat meowing in his ears made Khang wake up. He was startled and looked up to see that he was lying on the bed. His clothes were wet, covered in mud and leaves, his body was hot and his head hurt. He exhaled, everything last night, was it a dream or real? Duyan's eyes kept haunting him. Khang staggered to his feet, he was having a fever, his eyes were dizzy. He grabbed the wall and walked across the room. The lid of the chest had been closed. He raised his hand to open the lid. It was empty inside, only a layer of debris. The wood sticks up at the bottom. Khang sat down on the floor, panting because he was tired. Suddenly his eyes narrowed. He reached out and touched the wood underneath the chest lid. There were long, crisscross streaks on the hard wood. He was speechless. I remember hearing the sound of scratching in the night. Perhaps the girl was brought here, and in desperation, she tried to find a way out of this dark place. Suddenly looking down, he widened his eyes and screamed and fainted. Below, in the chest, Duyan was lying stiffly. The high fever made Khang unconscious all day. In his delirium, Khang saw him walking on a country road full of wildflowers, the afternoon sun sparkling on the green trees. The color of purple flowers is scattered all over the tangerine legs. There was a gentle voice calling his name. Khang looked back. Duyan stood shyly in the sunlight, her white silk shirt shining brightly on her smiling face like a flower. He felt extremely familiar with that smile. She ran to hold his hand. They walked together on the long road. Khang bent down to pick a purple flower and put it in Duyan's hair. She looked at him lovingly, put her hand to Khang's face. He shivered, her hand was cold. Khang opened his eyes to look. In front of his eyes was the pale color of Duyan's white shirt, and her face was so sad. He raised his hand, but her eyes were getting farther and farther away. That same afternoon, Khang went into the neighborhood. He asked a few men to follow him to the pond behind the house. Coming to the tree stump where he saw Duyan fall. When the hoe strokes turned up the soil, white bones were revealed, mixed in with rotting white cloth. He suddenly felt a gentle breathing sound behind his ear. That night, Khang waited until midnight, until morning. Everything around was quiet. A few days later, while cleaning the house, he found a few old items, including a small notebook with yellowed paper, stuffed deep in the corner of the closet. He flipped through the small lines, Duyan's diary. The beauty was doomed. Duyan was orphaned at a young age. The girl found a beautiful love, but then her husband died in an accident in a faraway place. The miserable girl lived alone in this house, the house her husband bought for her. The months and days after her husband's death were filled with tear-stained letters about the memories of husband and wife. And also the insecurities and worries about a villain in the neighborhood who often comes to seduce her. The last page ends full of fear. Cat. Khang was startled and dropped the notebook, and an old photo fell out. A black cat appeared from nowhere and ran to rub against his leg. Khang bent down and picked it up to see. On the back are the words, "Wedding Anniversary." Day, month, year. In the picture, Duyan is radiant next to her husband. Khang was dumbfounded. Duyan's husband, that face, resembled him like 2 drops of water. Purple flowers bloomed on Duyan's grave, as sad as the life of a doomed girl. Khang tried to find out and found out that the man that Duyan was afraid of had a very painful end. He suddenly went crazy and cut his throat to death in a fit of madness. Is evil rewarded with evil? As for Khang, Duyan is more than just a name to him.